This week, Germany has not only refused to provide Ukraine with anti-armor and anti-aircraft weapons, they're actually blocking other NATO countries from providing those weapons to Ukraine. This is in part because Germany is now so dependent on Russian gas.
That was Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton on this program last week on Germany's reliance on Russian gas after the Biden administration allowed the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline to flow into Germany last year. My next guest tried to stop Germany from aligning with Russia throughout his time in the Trump administration. Former Director of Intelligence John Ratcliffe joins me now to assess the U.S.-Russia standoff over a potential invasion of Ukraine. Director, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for being here. How do you see this and assess the Germany end of this, since Biden seems to think Germany's going to go along with the U.S.?
Yeah, well, that just underscores what a bad strategy the Biden administration has taken with respect to the whole Russia-Ukraine crisis. Look, Germany's made poor decisions, as Senator Cotton talked about, to essentially put Germany and the rest of Europe essentially in a hostage position with Russia with regard to the flow of energy into Europe. We knew that in the Trump administration. We were aware that, for instance, Angela Merkel's predecessor as the German chancellor, Gerhard Schroeder, is now the CEO of Rosneft, the largest Russian oil company. So, the idea that Germany ought to be working with us in stopping Russia on these particular issues was something that we understood that, although Germany is an ally, that we weren't trusting them to lead on these issues. And it's why, the things that you see Russia doing now weren't taking place in the Trump administration. But, where we stand on this right now, this whole approach by the Biden administration really underscores that we all hope that there's a good outcome. But if it does happen, it's going to happen in spite of Joe Biden and the decisions he's making on this issue, not because of that. And you only need to look at the actions of the Ukrainian president and what he's had to do in the last week. Within 2 hours of Joe Biden's press conference on this issue, the Ukrainian president had to tweet out, there are no small incursions, there are no small nations, there are no small casualties, essentially saying, don't listen to what Joe Biden is saying. He followed that up a day later after Joe Biden really set off a panic, saying we can't protect Americans in Kiev and calling on them to leave. Zelensky had to come out and say, hey, Kiev is safer than most U.S. cities. And then even yesterday, what President Zelensky said was what many of us had been saying on shows like this, Maria, for the past month or so, which is that the time to provide Ukrainians support in terms of sanctions against Russia and weaponry to Ukraine is now, not after Russia invades. So, I think President Zelensky, would probably tell you, with friends like Joe Biden, who needs enemies?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to me that under President Biden, you've got all of our adversaries acting up. I mean, there's Iran as well, backing the Houthis, who are striking Abu Dhabi unbelievably. Let's talk about Iran for a moment, because we've had news there over the weekend. Secretary Blinken saying that the window is closing. Where is this headed? Do you think that Joe Biden is going to get the U.S. back into a nuclear deal? And Iran, the Iranians won't even talk directly to the U.S., right?
Right. Now, this is headed in a terrible place, Maria. Look, we handed off a year ago peace in the Middle East on the heels of Abraham Accords, in part because Iran was poorer, weaker, and less influential than they'd been in a long, long time. They were literally on the verge of bankruptcy. We had prosecuted their terrorist leaders to final justice, like Qasem Soleimani. And now you look at what's happening in one short year, how the tables have turned. As you've talked about, the Biden administration has literally begged Iran back to the negotiating table to try and rehabilitate the failed Iranian nuclear deal. And we're not even allowed to negotiate on our behalf. Our two biggest adversaries, China and Russia, are negotiating with Iran. And you don't need to take my word for how badly things are going. Joe Biden's own team members, negotiating teams, are leaving because they've characterized the approach as too soft. We're making too many concessions. Things like, not only giving as much as $10 billion in cash to Iran, but lifting sanctions on the central bank, on the Iranian National Oil Company, on the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. I mean, Maria, it's bad enough to negotiate with terrorists. Essentially, Joe Biden's giving them a blank check. And you know, I think, unfortunately, where this is headed is the Iranians are playing us. Our biggest ally in the Middle East, Israel, is saying Iran is playing you. They're at breakout, trying to finish getting to a nuclear weapon. And you need to go back to the Trump maximum pressure campaign. But I don't think we're going to do that in this administration. And I fear that Joe Biden's going to allow Iran to become the 10th member of the nuclear club of nations, which would be a legacy that presidents are going to have to deal with for a long, long time after Joe Biden is gone.
And then, John, there's China. Finally, somebody confronts Joe Biden about speaking with Xi Jinping 4 times over the last year and not once bringing up the origins of COVID-19. He claims he did. Let's look at this exchange right here in the last week and a half. Watch.
You didn't press for transparency, and also whether that has anything to do with your son's involvement in an investment firm controlled by Chinese state-owned entities.
The answer is that I did raise the question of transparency. I spent a lot of time with him, and the fact is that they're just not being transparent.
Transparency on the coronavirus origins.
Yes.
And you did during the virtual summit. Is there a reason your press staff was unaware of that? And what did you say to the Chinese president?
And they weren't with me the entire time.
They weren't with him the entire time, John, and he said, yeah, they're just not going to be transparent. Why don't they just release the transcript? I'm not buying that he even brought it up, but even if he did bring it up, what do you think about his answer there?
Well, none of that's good. You know, does he not remember the conversation he had with President Xi? If he had a 3.5-hour summit, I'm not sure what's worse, that he did raise the issue, as he's now claiming, contrary to press reports, that he did raise the issue that the U.S. intelligence community, all 18 agencies, find that the lab leak at Wuhan is one of only 2 plausible explanations that caused the pandemic and killed 1 million Americans, or that President Xi's response to that was, as you just heard from Joe Biden, no, we're not going to cooperate. You know, go pound sand, get lost. You know, none of those scenarios is good. You know, right now what we do know is that our intelligence community has made assessed with confidence that the lab leak is one of only 2 possible explanations for this pandemic that killed 1 million Americans. And when our president raises it with the leader of China and tells us that his response is, hey, you know, get lost, we're not going to cooperate. That tells you how they are viewing leadership in the White House, that they will do what they want, when they want, with impunity with regard to the United States. And it's why you see these statements coming out of China, out of Russia, out of Iran, where they are dictating to the United States what's going to happen instead of the U.S. leading and dictating to the rest of the world.
So, Director, real quick before you go, we just had Peter Schweitzer on talking about the $31 million that Joe Biden accepted, Hunter Biden accepted. Is this treason? You were a prosecutor, a lawyer, a resume that's rich. Tell us, is it treason?
Well, the way to find out is to have hearings in Congress that get to the bottom of China and these connections. As you talked about, Nancy Pelosi hasn't held that. I've talked to Kevin McCarthy about the fact that, look, whoever's in charge of Congress ought to be having these hearings into COVID origins and the connections between China and our officials here.
Okay.
And that's the opportunity to get those answers.
Thank you, John Ratcliffe. Good to see you. We'll be right back.
You bet.